Hey guys, welcome to another one of my live streams. This is an extremely exciting live stream because the book I will be reading from just came out in print on Monday morning. So far, the only way to purchase Was I Ever Normal is to order it by phone, but in the next 2 weeks, you'll be able to order it online, and within a month, it should be available at all major chain bookstores like Barnes & Nobles and Books A Million, as well as a whole ton of independent bookstores. Yes, I will be doing book signings, but only in locations that I can comfortably drive to in my wheelchair van. This whole process is beyond exciting, and I'll show you. This is what my book looks like. It's really thick because it's a novel in verse. So if you look at the inside of it, it's kind of like poetry almost, but it tells a story as opposed to being poems. So this is what it looks like. Anyway, back to Cassie. After being told she was selfish, manipulative, a liar, and passive-aggressive at their last family meeting in Chapter 20, she is barely able to keep herself under control. The hospital that she thought would be the answer to all of her problems is just making things worse. Here we are at the beginning of Chapter 21, with Cassie being secluded in the quiet room for not being able to complete her nutritional supplement in 15 minutes. And a staff member is taunting her from the doorway. She could no longer resist. Cassie, who doesn't have a violent bone in her body, finally gives in and hurls the nutritional supplement drink right at the staff named Dee-Dee's head. Chapter 21. This is what we'll start reading. You see, you really are a loser. You really are a bad kid. They were all right. You fell into temptation. You fell right into my trap. You are Eve and you bit the apple. Now you will be banished from the Garden of Eden. You can never return. Never, ever, never, ever, never, ever, never, ever. I raised my hands to my ears to block out Bellingham's hoots. My hands weren't enough to stop him. Nothing seemed to be enough. Just then, I thought to look up to see if Dee-Dee was okay. I didn't really care that much. I still felt like she deserved to get hit in the head, but I was worried about getting in trouble. The curtain had missed her head and landed on the floor next to her, but she knew I'd been aiming for her, and she didn't look happy. Behavior like this is just going to keep you here longer, Dee-Dee informed me. I'm going to inform your treatment team about this incident. You're going to have an extra half hour in the quiet room as well. And I stopped listening to her and just watched her mouth form shapes as she put her words into the empty air. It was kind of funny. After my stint in the quiet room, I still felt kind of shaky. Staff had me fill out this sheet of paper that asked me lots of questions about why I had engaged in the behavior of throwing the resource at Dee-Dee and what my vulnerabilities and triggers had been, and how I could break the chain of thoughts and emotions to prevent me from engaging in the behavior again. I just sat there staring at the paper, with the pencil half falling out of my hand. Honestly, I thought I had done the right thing by throwing the resource at Dee-Dee's head. She seriously deserved it. I hoped that maybe next time she would think twice before she treated someone else the way she had treated me. Slice, rip, tear. Slice, rip, tear. Slice, rip, tear. I heard Fellingham's voice and knew he wanted me to try and cut myself with the pencil in my hand. But I was sick of hurting myself. The thought was making me nauseous. However, soon Fellingham's voice was joined by a chorus of other chanting voices. All of them repeating the same message. My body started shaking. I put my hand on my knee. My stress had triggered one of my focal aware seizures, where I didn't lose consciousness, but my leg wouldn't stop jerking and bouncing around without me moving it on purpose. My hand was not enough to stop the seizure. Nothing was helping. Para appeared in front of me. She walked with a graceful step, but had a glint of anger in her eyes. My breath was catching in a lump developing in my throat. She walked closer, took another step closer, and closer, and closer. My throat was now totally closed up. I knew I had no choice. I tightened my grip on the pencil and raised it to my arm. At first, I made my strokes deep and purposeful. No blood or marks appeared. I pulled the pencil harder and more furiously across the canvas of my inner arm. Slowly, red and white lines of scratches were engraving themselves on my skin. Soon, I wasn't even looking. I was just slamming the pencil through my arm. The tip broke off, and I just kept going. Fog was billowing in around me, but the voices were quieter. I didn't want to risk them coming back, so I continued savagely attacking my arms. Nothing besides the burning in my arms was registering in my consciousness. All I could see was fog and the lines of scratches and blood on my body. All I could hear was Bellingham and some others that I didn't even recognize, whispering to me that I was a bad girl. Then suddenly I was thrown, careening back into the reality belonging to everyone else in the world. I felt strong, rough hands gripping my wrists. You need to stop this behavior right now. I was straddling between two realities and couldn't identify who the voice belonged to or which reality it was coming from. All I knew was that I didn't want the hands on my body, and I didn't want the voices in my head. When the fog finally cleared away, I was back in the choir room. About an hour had passed. I wasn't sure what I had done in that hour. Looking at my arms, I noticed that most of the scratches were superficial. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. A nurse was sitting in the doorway. She was sort of watching me and sort of talking to a couple of girls who were starting to argue with each other. How much longer do I have to be in here? I asked the nurse. You can come out now as long as you promise you'll be safe, the nurse told me. She had pretty long black hair that looked so soft it made me want to touch it. I'll be safe, I told the nurse. The truth was, I had no idea if I could really keep myself safe. My control over myself was slowly drifting farther and farther away from me. The day I hid in the drawer was when Susan, the social worker, really decided that I was putting on an act and trying to get attention. That day, I saw Para coming toward me from down the hall. She had a malicious glint in her eye and a sharp butcher knife in her hand. At that point, I didn't care about anything other than getting away from Para. I screamed a loud, high-pitched scream. I'm sure the staff and patients around me reacted to my erratic behavior, but I have no idea how. All I remembered was the feeling of my heart pounding, my breath catching in my throat, and my head spinning. I took off toward my room, running as fast as I could. Once I got to my room, I pulled out the bottom drawer of the dresser that was bolted down to the floor. Almost all the way out, I climbed into the drawer and used my body weight to shove it almost all the way closed. It didn't occur to me that I might have trouble getting back out. I think part of me planned on climbing into that drawer and building and hiding in there forever. In the drawer, I felt safe. It was small and dark and contained, and no one would bother me about or yell at me in there. I was in the drawer for almost an hour, completely oblivious to all of the staff who were frantically searching for me and worrying about lawsuits. The staff that finally found me had to remember that my petite and skinny little body could probably fit almost anywhere. When I felt the drawer sliding open, a feeling of terror and surprise filled me. I wasn't worried about being in trouble. I was worried about having to face the world and possibly Para again. All that particular staff said to me was, "You are way too sweaty. You are definitely going to need a shower. I hope that you're prepared for the severe consequences from this little hide and seek thing you just pulled." My body felt cramped and uncomfortable as it unfurled out the drawer. When she lifted me out, Para was nowhere to be seen. Hiding became a coping skill for me. Every time I saw Para looking angry, I would find a spot to hide in, to protect myself from the danger lurking in places no one else could see. The staff were getting frustrated with me. They all started claiming that I was just trying to get attention. I hated the way people assumed that I was always just looking for attention. I wished they would understand. We had another family meeting a week into my stay at the hospital. The meeting was with Susan. Both my parents came to the meeting. We sat stiffly in hardback chairs as Susan explained to us that I was extremely manipulative, attention-seeking, passive-aggressive, and that they had diagnosed me with having borderline personality traits, among other things. My parents swallowed everything that Susan was feeding them. I just sat there zoning in and out as my leg went through a series of focal aware seizures. Lately, the seizures have been really bad. I wondered how much of my struggles had to do with brain damage from all those seizures. Finally, I couldn't hold everything in anymore. I exploded in a rush of yelling. You guys don't understand anything. I tried to explain to you that I get mixed up because I hear things that other people can't. I hear and see things that other people can't see, and they get so loud and convincing that I have to listen to them or I get punished. I need help making them go away so that I can stop hurting myself. I hate hurting myself and don't want to, but they force me into it. That feels like it's what the real problem is. I'm scared and overwhelmed and confused, not manipulative or searching for attention. I tried to kill myself because I couldn't take a living like this anymore, not because I was looking for attention. Nobody ever listens to me or believes me or tries to help me in the right ways. I hate you guys. The words tumbled out of my mouth fast and furiously. I think they had been hiding behind my lips for some time. Tears soon followed my verbal explosion, and I struggled hard to get back in control. But I couldn't pull the pieces of myself back together. Susan and my parents both claimed that I was just continuing to make things up and that I really didn't hear the voices. I was just trying to use them as an excuse for my behavior. They said that I was manufacturing symptoms and pathology in an attempt to avoid working on the real issues. I just kept crying harder and harder until I ached from crying so hard. My last bundles of hope were cracking apart, withering and dying. There was nothing left for me to cling to. But the ironic thing was that soon the others started up with their whispers and yelling, both at the same time, and Fellingham began laughing at me. I kept crying and yelling at my parents that they didn't understand at all and that I hated them, even though I could barely hear what they were saying back because the voices from the wrong reality were too loud. When my parents finally left after the traumatic family meeting was over, I felt sad and I missed them, but I didn't feel guilty and I still felt mad. It wasn't fair that nobody listened to me. It wasn't fair that nobody was going to help me. It wasn't fair that I had to suffer so much. The intense anger worsened after that family meeting when the voices weren't so bad that they were chopping up my thoughts, making it too difficult for me to think. I wrote nasty and angry letters to the social worker, Dr. Nolan, the hospital staff, and each of my parents. I never gave them the letters. or even showed the letters to anyone, but I wrote them anyway. I guess I figured if no one else would give me appropriate therapy, then I would give myself therapy through writing. Things were really foggy. Multiple realities were fighting for my attention. Tension filled my body as waves of fury crashed over my head. Even the voices had an angry quality to them. I felt like I needed to explode out of my skin and just throw anything I could get my hands on. I felt like I wanted to rip, tear, and destroy. I felt like how I had felt when I was been on the Klonopin. But this time, there was no medicine to blame. The only side effects I had from my new medications were diarrhea, nausea, and occasional dizziness. But the side effects from the way the hospital staff were treating me, like the high-intensity anger from the way I was still so misunderstood, that was incredibly painful. My jaw ached from grinding my teeth so hard. My hands were damp with sweat from keeping them closed in fists all the time. My body was shaky. I would explode at random times and places on unsuspecting and generally mostly innocent victims. The first victim was a tall and thickly built boy. He was probably a few years older than me, and like most of the other patients, he didn't know me very well because I kept mostly to myself. We were standing in line in front of the medication room, waiting for our morning medications to be administered. The narrator was narrating the way I was fidgeting my toes. Bellingham was whispering to someone else. Then that I was going to need to be taught a lesson. Just then, the features of the boy in front of me started to shift and change until he looked exactly like Susan. Your parents don't want you anymore. I explained to them how manipulative and horrible you are, and they're refusing to take you home. I guess you'll just have to stay here with us for a long, long time, she told me. Then she laughed. She said those horrible words and laughed. I couldn't handle that. The feelings that had been boiling inside of me for several days now exploded out of me. The voices didn't tell me to punch her. I did that out of the seething anger that had finally reached a critical height. Lightning bolts of fury were flashing in my mind. Before I could even think too much about what I was going to do, my fist swung out and collided with her side. "Ow!" cried a voice. But it wasn't Susan's voice. The voice belonged to a teenage voice. The features on Susan were shifting and changing again. And then I saw the boy standing there instead. I had just punched this boy for no reason, I thought to myself. I felt disgusted with myself. The boy seemed fine. He was holding his side, but that was the only visible sign that he had been attacked. Still, the guilt growing inside of me was making me feel like I was going to puke. Sorry, I tried to apologize, but my voice was so quiet that I'm not even sure if I really spoke aloud or not. The narrator was now laughing his head off, and the boy was staring at me, looking very confused. A staff member came rushing over just then, and his mouth was forming the shape of words. But the narrator was laughing too loudly for me to be able to hear. The day after I'd punched the boy, I was put in the quiet room again, handed the worksheets and the crayon, and told to finish them. They were supposed to help me analyze my abusive behavior. The worksheets were called behavior chain analyses. Apparently, they were supposed to be a part of a type of therapy. The therapy was called dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. They used DBT with patients who had borderline personality disorder. I couldn't get myself to even start to fill the sheets out. The questions didn't make sense to me, and my thoughts of the incident were all foggy and fragmented. Besides, I knew I didn't have borderline personality disorder, and I felt like filling out the worksheets would be like saying I agreed with their inappropriate diagnosis. This time, they wouldn't let me have a pencil. They gave me a lime green crayon instead. How was I supposed to write with a crayon? I just scribbled, "I don't know," in large, messy letters as the response to every question. And the truth was that I was being honest. I really didn't know, or at least understand, what had and still was happening to me. I think that's the end of that. Yeah, that is the end of that chapter. I'd love to hear what you guys think of it. If you have any feedback, again, this is what the book looks like in print. It does look thick, and as I said before, that's because it's poetry in verse. It's a really good book. I know you guys have been enjoying listening to me read it. I highly recommend buying it. I barely make money off each copy sold, but it is a really good book. I worked really hard on it. I would be thrilled if you bought a copy. And if you want, and you want to buy a copy directly from me and send me $42 instead of $32, I'll buy a copy, sign it, and then send it to you with no fees for shipping and handling. Does anyone have any questions or comments? No questions or comments? You guys can come up with questions or comments before the actual live and then type them in at the beginning, and I'll answer them at the end if you want. I would be so happy to do that for you guys. But if no one has any questions or comments, then I'll end here. I love you guys so much. Take care. Bye.